Welcome to Gold and Black Live, March 11th edition. It's actually a morning edition today, 10 o'clock. I think it's our first Gold and Black Live in the morning, but Brian Newbert joins me. He'll lead off the show. Segment 2 will be Jerry Palm from CBS Sports and Talk Bracketology. And then Tom Dienhart in segment 3 will kind of wrap up some spring football, not wrap up, but at least talk about the first 5 practices the Boilermakers have had. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day, State HCI tonight. And State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. Brian, when you look at this and what we're going to be seeing here tonight when Purdue plays in its quarterfinal game, Big Ten tournament is always an interesting thing. It's not always necessarily who you're playing. It's about yourself. And Purdue has got some things to prove, sure. And yet how much things change before Selection Sunday will be interesting to watch. But what do you think the status of this team after talking to Matt Painter earlier this week? Any clue on what Purdue's mindset is or what it should be heading into the Big Ten tournament?
Well, I think in general, even if it wasn't the postseason, I think it would be more about Purdue than it would be anything else.
Yeah.
Purdue's just got to take care of the basketball. They just have to value possessions. They have to play every possession throughout a game like it's the last possession of the game. And if they do that, I don't think there's anybody they can't beat in the Big Ten tournament. I'm not sure there's anybody they can't beat in the NCAA tournament. It's just a matter of whether or not they can take that step on March 11th, that you've been kind of waiting on for the last 3 months here. But I don't see any reason to think Purdue isn't confident, shouldn't be confident, won't want to have success in the Big Ten tournament. I would expect Purdue to play well. But they have some things to prove here because obviously they have not played well enough at times to keep luck off the table. And luck has not been kind to Purdue at the end of some of these games or throughout some of these games. Purdue just, again, the single biggest issue for Purdue, again, a 25-6 basketball team, is if they just treat every possession like it matters the same as every other possession in a game, they're going to be a really tough out this month.
Yeah. Big Ten tournament, obviously, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that Purdue will be a 2 or 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. It's possible, if you talk to our next guest, Jerry Palm, I know had in his bracketology, Purdue is the number 2 seed. Joe Lenardi has them in a number 3 seed. It also appears that Purdue is likely headed to Indianapolis, but that's not absolutely guaranteed. But just talk about the familiarity Purdue of playing not only the Big Ten tournament, but possibly what that could mean early on, playing 60 miles down the road. And you see that as any advantage? I know you kind of talked about that before, but how much do you see that as an advantage for Purdue heading into the postseason?
Well, what good did it do Purdue last year?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's a big deal personally. I think it's always nice to have your fans there, I guess. But I think, the NCAA tournament's a situation where I think you're always going to have X number of fans there. I think the NCAA tournament in general is just a more sterile sort of environment. Maybe that's what helps Purdue this year. I don't know. They played well in neutral site environments this year for the most part, the NC State game notwithstanding. I think, when you look at how they played on the road this year in terms of putting themselves in some of these close games and then allowing crazy stuff to happen, maybe a neutral site is better for Purdue. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here. I don't.
How do you know? I mean,
really have my finger on the pulse of the psychology of this team as much as I'd like. I just think that I guess it helps. It sure doesn't hurt you.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a game changer that Purdue's only playing 60 miles down the road. Because, again, they were playing 60 miles down the road last year, and they lost 2 overtime games with fans present. I think people tend to forget that the postseason last year was the return of fans. It wasn't capacity or anything like that, but there was at least a real life environment there. And I don't know if that helped Purdue. It could have hurt Purdue for all I know. I think that was a young team that did a good job listening for the most part, a good job concentrating. And then all of a sudden the dynamics of the environment changed, and all of a sudden, things went sideways on them a little bit. The first half against Ohio State was awful. And the first half against North Texas wasn't ideal. The overtimes of both of those games weren't ideal. So we'll see. That's all I got for you.
And that is about a lot of what March Madness is about, is we'll see and see how things play out. Okay, all Big Ten teams this week were announced. Any surprises from your standpoint? Jaden Ivy, first team, Zach Edey, second team, Travion Williams, sixth player of the year, so to speak. Anything that jumped off the page at you as those teams were announced?
No, Travion Williams was third team All Big Ten as well.
Right. Okay.
That's it. That's exactly how I voted. I had Jaden Ivy first team. I had Zach Edey second team. I had Travion Williams third team. One of the rare occasions where a team will have two players at the same position both make All Big Ten, but I think it was kind of a no-brainer. To be honest with you, I don't think anything really surprised me. I had Jaden Ivy as my Big Ten Player of the Year midway through the season. Back when I thought Purdue was positioning itself well to win the Big Ten. Obviously, that did not happen. A lot kind of went into that, but I think all things considered, he had a great year. He had a really, really good year, and I know people like to pick him apart because he's a great player, and you tend to focus on their flaws more than their strengths. But he had a great year. Zach Edey had a great year. Again, both of those guys. So what people forget about this team is everybody looked at Purdue as coming back intact from last season. Well, yeah, fine. On paper they did, but your two best players were sophomores, and your outcomes this year were dependent on their ongoing developments. Jaden Ivy's, from a decision-making perspective, has been a process. It has had some ups and downs. His defensive maturity has been a process. Zach Edey's physicality, his toughness, his ability to play as big as he is without fear of him being punished for being gigantic. That's been a process. Both of those things have been real processes for this team, and they have guided outcomes. And both of them have had their ups and downs for whatever reason at the foul line. Both of those guys were just a little bit better. Purdue's in a very different place here. But that being said, if those guys weren't as good as they were, Purdue's also in a very different place on the other end of that spectrum. I think both of those guys, all things considered, had great years. I think they're still young players, and people tend to forget about that. But I think both were very deserving of their all Big Ten honors.
One of your favorite things is night basketball games. Purdue playing at 9:00 tonight, and yet just that condensed 3 games. Because if Purdue would happen to win tonight, they would go at 9:00 tonight, 2:30 tomorrow, and then back for the championship if they would win that. Does that put any advantage, disadvantage, and as you prepare for the following week, do you put anything into that outside of the inconvenience of people like yourself that have to work till 3:00 in the morning and then get back up and go again?
Well, just to be clear, my issue with 9 p.m. games isn't my own laziness or my own unwillingness to be up that late. I just like for my readers to be awake.
Yeah, that's helpful.
When all of this work I'm toiling to get done after games, I would just prefer it to be, there'd be some measure of prime time involved here.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a baby. I think you want to win this thing if you're Purdue. I think you have a prime opportunity here to win this thing. You have a prime opportunity to win another championship, or to win a championship. I know it's not the same as winning the regular season title, but it's better than the alternative. I think people look at it like, oh, we don't want to play 3 games in 3 days, a week before the NCAA tournament, because we need the rest. Mm-hmm. Well, what good did rest do Purdue last year? I think positive momentum matters as much as rest. And this is a great opportunity for Purdue to get hot, for Purdue to play well and recognize what worked headed into the NCAA tournament, for them to acclimate themselves to elimination style basketball, and for them to potentially hang a banner of some sort. People, again, don't value the Big Ten tournament the same as the regular season, nor should they. But Purdue's going to still hang a banner if they win this thing. It's still going to go down in the historical record that Purdue won the Big Ten title in 2022. I think positive momentum can matter for this team as much as that extra day of rest. I know nobody really wants to play that game on Sunday. It's kind of a pain, but I would hope that this team wouldn't be vulnerable to some sort of fatigue issue. If they are deep, they are young. I mean, it's not like this is a team of 65-year-old men here. I think they can handle.
Hey,
all due respect,
I'm not quite there yet.
I think they can handle playing 3 games in 3 days with championship implications, and then turn right around in 4 or 5 days. Keep in mind, you're not turning around and playing on Tuesday. You're turning around and playing on, would it be Thursday or Friday?
It'd be Thursday, and in all likely, if they get the championship game, they'll be playing in Indianapolis, so they don't have to travel. The Boilermakers will not have to travel.
Correct. So the best case scenario here is if you play on Sunday, it's really not that big a deal turning around and playing on Thursday. I obviously have never had to do it, but I would think young people would be buoyant enough physically and emotionally and mentally to be able to figure out how to have 4 days off, or 4 days to prepare for a Thursday night game, and still be functional.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think you're going to have enough time, just because, again, you'll have to be back in Indianapolis on Wednesday for press conferences and all that, but it would be a 65 or 70 mile trip up I-65 from that standpoint. So I think you're right. All right, Jay, Purdue's top end potential here, and much has been talked about Jaden Ivy and what he may have to do, or what Purdue has to do. Is it as simple as everybody raising their level of play? Is Jaden Ivy have to be special and for absolutely elite for Purdue to make it as far as it wants to make it, or is that just a silly question? We just don't know on that as well.
It's hard to envision Purdue going where Purdue wants to go without Jaden Ivy playing really well. But a couple of things are going on here. Purdue finished the season 1-2. Right? They finished their regular season 1-2. They, after the week off, but in those games, they defended as well as they have all season long. Now, is Michigan State an offensive juggernaut? No. Is Indiana an offensive juggernaut? No. Is Wisconsin an offensive juggernaut? Certainly not. The backboard maybe, but not Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Purdue did a good job in those games defensively. They made Michigan State make a bunch of shots at the end of shot clocks. They did a pretty good job against Indiana for the most part. They made Xavier Johnson make the shots that they were willing to accept. That they held Trace Jackson Davis in check for the most part. I think Purdue took a real step defensively. If Purdue can do that in the NCAA tournament and finally consistently take care of the basketball, the Michigan State game was a complete abomination in that regard. That stretch in the Indiana game was a complete abomination in that regard. But if they can just figure that out, they're going to be really hard to beat. I think also a couple of things you always need in the NCAA tournament, aside from matchups pretty much determine everything, is an accommodating whistle. For one thing, I think Purdue's advantages in the post become a little bit more acute when teams who have never seen a Zach Edey before have to suddenly play against Zach Edey. Same goes for Travion Williams, who now has to be considered small now that he's got Zach Edey next to him. But also, you need breaks. You need some luck, and I know fans don't like to hear about luck because you make your own luck. But at the end of the day, yes, Purdue didn't play well enough to keep luck out of the equation, but the burden of perfection never lies on a team to win a basketball game. And the reality was, for whatever reason, these games came down to these shots, and Purdue lost games on more crap shots than I think any team I've ever seen in my life. I documented like 6 of them, or 5 or 6 of them yesterday in my column. And it's not just the game winners, but it's also the Joey Hauser hot potato in the second half against Michigan State after Eric Hunter blows up that possession with a deflection.
Right.
It's the Xavier Johnson hot potato at Indiana, where he's wearing Eric Hunter basically at the end of a shot clock. A guy who's not a good 3-point shooter just throws the ball in. Stuff like that. They have had more stuff like that go against them than I think any team I've ever covered. And maybe the universe balances out at some point. I don't know. But Purdue, I think anybody who gets to a Final Four or wins a national title, I think they need some luck. I think Virginia is the poster boy for that.
Oh, no doubt.
That was a charmed life kind of situation. And I'm not saying that, the universe is going to be kind to Purdue, but I'm saying that would be something Purdue's going to need to turn around here outside of its control.
Yeah. Balance in the universe. That's something we're all striving for. All right, Brian, thanks so much. We'll look forward to your coverage on the site later today, if not tonight, if not tomorrow morning, as we'll look for Purdue's quarterfinal matchup, 9:00 tonight, when the Boilermakers take the court. And obviously a lot of coverage as we get into Selection Sunday and through next week. Okay, we'll be back in 2 minutes. Jerry Palm will join us from CBSSports.com and give his bracketology report. And then, of course, Tom Dienhart in segment 3 will talk Purdue spring football and more. So Brian, have a good rest of your day. And all of you, stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 minutes on Gold and Black Live.